Hello everyone, my name is India Davis with the India Davis Real Estate Team, and I am here today to talk you through a buyer representation agreement document. This document is something that is required for us to present to all clients before we actually go and see any homes, and it does explain our relationship and is essentially our contract to work together in a real estate transaction as a buyer. So the top part of this document, it just does give a disclaimer here. It says this agreement is a legally binding contract. If not understood, seek competent legal advice before signing. This agreement may require the payment by you as the client of a non-refundable retainer fee for the services provided by broker. So I'll explain that in just a minute. But it is a document that basically sets up our agreement to work together through a buying transaction. So the top part of this is just the information about you as a client, and then my brokerage and me as the representing designated agent. So obviously contact information for all parties there. The second thing here is appointment, and that is just a little bit about what you have informed me that you're looking for in a property. So that might be a residential home, maybe new construction, maybe something off market, maybe an investment property, all types of different options there. And it does talk a little bit about whether that's going to be intermediary potentially, and it could be intermediary, where it means that we might be looking at homes that are also listed by agents that work for Keller Williams Southlake, or you might, as a buying client, be looking at a property that I have listed with one of my seller clients, and that would be intermediary listed by designated agent. So that's the difference there, and I can certainly give you the options there and what that would look like. But in most cases, intermediary by brokerage is much more common. And then it, of course, lists some special features about what you're looking for in your property, the general location that you're kind of looking in, and your price range, because that is super important for us to know before we start our search. Financing is listed here as well, and it does indicate what your plans are for your financing, whether that's a cash purchase or you're going through a lender, or you're planning to do a 1031 exchange, or potentially owner carried financing. So we would want to know some of those things before we get into looking and certainly into making an offer. This next part is probably one of the more important parts for both of us. It does talk about compensation and how that works. So recently, this has become a very newsworthy topic because there was a very large class action lawsuit over the course of about the last 4 or 5 years. And some of this information has recently changed, or not exactly changed, but just changed in the way that we're required to present it and make sure that our clients are very well aware of who pays for what in a real estate transaction. So the very first thing I wanted to mention is that compensation is and has always been negotiable. So that is something that's very important for you as a client to know, that compensation is a negotiable item. So the top part here says that the broker will or will not require the payment by client of a non-refundable retainer. That is not something that I require. So my check mark would be on the will not require the payment of a retainer. The second box down just talks about if the fee is required, what it would be. In that box, there would be a big not applicable mention. C is where it kind of gets into the meat of compensation. It says the parties agree that broker will receive compensation calculated as follows. For me, my compensation that I will put in this box is 3%, and it says 3% of gross sales price if client agrees to purchase property in paragraph 2 of this agreement, which we'll get there in a minute. And then the second line down there says it could also be a flat rate compensation. That is not something I typically do, so it would be a percentage. And this is important for you to know that In the very next line down, we're going to talk about how that gets paid. So who pays that? In this document, it is stating that that is the amount that the buyer would need to agree to be responsible for, because that is my fee for helping you through the transaction. And I will certainly present with you the value that I bring and why that, what I'm doing for that percentage of the transaction. However, in the very next line down here in C, I would like to highlight this because this is really important for people to be aware of. It says that the broker will seek to obtain payment of the compensation specified in this paragraph first from the seller, landlord, or their agents. So just so that you're aware, when we enter into making an offer on a property, 99% of the time, I am going to put in the offer as part of our negotiation my fee. And that is, of course, so that you don't have to come out of pocket additional money on top of closing costs and your down payment. So we are going to put that amount written into an offer. And best case scenario, the seller is going to accept our offer with those terms, and they are then going to pay the 3% compensation that is my fee as part of that transaction. This is really going to depend on what the market is doing at the time. So it is important to know that in a buyer's market or in a balanced market, that's usually going to be something that's going to be acceptable to a seller, is to negotiate that fee in. Now, if we get into a market in which it's very seller friendly and we are against multiple offers on the same property, then a seller may be a little less likely to accept an offer where they're having to come out of pocket additional money to pay the buyer's agent compensation. So again, it's just going to be a negotiable item, and it will depend on the market, but it's something just to know that what my fee is, and agreement in order to work together, it does have to come from you as the buyer that you would agree to that, but obviously, there's lots of scenarios in which that fee is going to be covered by the other side of the transaction. And it is negotiable, so we can certainly discuss it further. It does say that if they refuse to pay the full amount or any of it, then you as the buyer would be responsible. So there may be a situation in which they offer to pay half or 2% instead of 3%. So it does state that you would then be responsible for the remainder of that payment. The agreed upon compensation is earned and payable at closing. So no one would be owed any money or paid any money really until the transaction does close. And then if you were to be looking at more than one property at the same time, that fee and compensation is payable per property. This D section under bonus, it says, in addition to compensation listed in paragraph 3B, if the seller or landlord or another agent offers broker a bonus in connection with the sale or lease of the property, the broker may collect, and then it gives a blank as to what percentage or dollar amount that is. This comes into play most often with new construction, and there may be a time at which a builder is offering an extra bonus, either in a flat dollar amount or a percentage, to a realtor for bringing their clients to their development and getting them under contract with a property. So we do put an amount in there. It's usually 2%. It's not something that you're responsible for paying. It just covers that if there is any kind of bonus given, that we then would be able to accept it up to 2% in that instance. It's very specific that when that happens, it's usually not across the board. So, and it then does state, again, total compensation for services provided pursuant to this agreement from any source may not exceed the amount or rate agreed to by the buyer. So I'm not allowed to accept anything additional that's not on this form. So it's important for you to know that as well. The safeguard period talks a little bit about the time that we're working together. So the dates on this agreement would be our contractual agreed buyer and agent representation. If there are homes that we have looked at and you then decide to make an offer on a home after our agreement has expired, there is a safeguard period of 90 days that would still allow me to be your representative in that situation and would still offer me the same compensation that was agreed upon in this agreement, because that home that you might be offering on would be one that we saw or that I presented to you during the time of our agreement. And then it also states that I didn't put a number in here, but usually it's within 5 days from the termination of our agreement or the end date of our agreement that I would present to you a full list of all the properties that we've seen or that I've provided to you through an MLS search, so that there's documentation of what we've seen or what I've been provided to you. And if, 30, 45 days after our agreement's over, you ended up purchasing one of those properties, that our agreement would then still be in place. It does talk a little bit about, it says the amount or calculation of broker compensation or any sharing of compensation between brokers is not fixed, controlled, recommended, suggested, or maintained by law or by the broker, and compensation is fully negotiable. So it's just something that we like to repeat and make sure everyone's aware that it is all negotiable, so we can certainly discuss. And then it gives the terms of the agreement, the dates, so the beginning date, and then how long our agreement's going to be in place. You have a choice to have a shorter term agreement or to have a longer term agreement, and it will depend specifically on you as a buyer and what your needs are and, kind of your situation and timeline. All right, then it goes down to here and it talks a little bit about the client represents that it has not entered into any other exclusive representation agreement with another broker or agent. So this is very important that we need to make sure before we sign this agreement together that you haven't entered into this agreement with another broker or real estate agent that is still in place, because we can't have two representation agreements at the same time. So it's important that if you have been working with another realtor before myself, that the representation agreement is complete, the date has passed, or that you go back to that agent and terminate that agreement before we start working together, as you can't have two at the same time. Client represents that it will cooperate with broker and agents in a timely manner, reviewing any properties, evaluating paperwork and documentation. There's a couple of the other understandings here that that I work under the direction of a broker and have a designated broker to assist in services. The client understands that broker offers services to the public, including other sellers and buyers. So there may be a situation that I'm working with another buyer who's looking at similar or the same properties that you might be looking at. So it's important to understand that. Client understands that the property that they're seeking may entail a large amount of time spent by the broker and designated agent in conducting searches and research, and corresponding with other brokers and setting up showings. And that you understand that the fee in paragraph 3A is required and is non-refundable for any reason, even if you as a client were to identify the property that you ended up wanting to make an offer on. So my job as a real estate agent and as your representative is not primarily to find you property, although I certainly assist in that. My job really comes, then the expertise that I have comes after that fact. We find the property, and then the expertise that I have gets us through writing up the contract, negotiating all the terms, getting through that option period, and all the way through to the end of the transaction and to closing. And then finally, client understands that when viewing property, you may be recorded or otherwise monitored. So it is important to remember that, and just remember not to say anything that you wouldn't want a seller to potentially hear you say, because there's a good likelihood that they are recording us. And then finally, it says client understands that the Fair Housing Act protects purchasers or renters of housing from discrimination based upon race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, or national origin. And the law applies to property owners as well as real estate agents and brokers and financial institutions, including mortgage brokers and loan officers. And equality as important, these real estate and financial professionals may not follow such discriminatory instructions from a party to a transaction. So that's just our fair housing statement. We want to make sure everyone is aware of that. In the section 7, it does talk about my services and what those are. So identifying properties certainly is part of my services within the specifications that you've provided. So we want to make sure that we're matching the properties with what it is that you're looking for and within your buying power. Registering the client to view properties through the MLS and our private collection. Arrange a client viewing of properties and setting up those both digital and physical showings. Advising the client of comparable properties, so making sure that we're doing a comparative market analysis of the properties that you're interested in so you can see what the proper value is. Negotiating contract terms, protecting your confidentiality and being discreet and making sure that your private information is not shared. And then disclosing to client any known material information that would impact the client's evaluation of a property. And then section I just is, if the box is checked, that it means that I will only provide very limited services in addition to 7H. So if we have an agreement that I'm only providing you very limited services, then I might check this box and that would be where you would initial. Otherwise, you are getting full service India Davis real estate team. This bottom here is talking about that you acknowledge and agree that the broker and designated agent are being retained solely as real estate professionals, and we are not attorneys. So I will not be giving you any legal advice. If you do need legal advice, then you are advised to seek a legal professional or a professional in the area or the field that you need that advice. And that you agree to indemnify and hold harmless the broker and agents to any claims, disputes, litigations, judgments, costs, damages, and legal fees arising from misrepresentation by a client or other incorrect, incomplete information supplied by a client. And then just some other things here before everybody signs at the bottom. Limitation on broker liability. It does say that neither the broker nor the agent shall under any circumstances have any liability pursuant to this agreement, which is greater than the amount of the compensation paid. So if there is a dispute and we go to the court of law and you end up suing, it shouldn't be larger than the compensation paid to the broker. Attorney fees. If client or broker is a prevailing party in any legal proceeding brought as a result or dispute of this agreement, such prevailing parties may recover all costs of legal proceedings and reasonable attorney fees. Non-discrimination. We shall not act in any way to induce or discourage client from acquiring a particular property based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, familial status, or sexual orientation, or gender identity, or any other protected category. And then the terms of this agreement are complete and final expression of the entire agreement between the client and the broker. It cannot be altered or amended. Dispute resolution is the last part. It says the parties agree to make a good faith efforts to resolve any disputes that may arise. If the dispute cannot be resolved by negotiation, the parties agree to submit the dispute to mediation before resorting to arbitration. So that is the whole document. I do like to take time to explain it because it is very important that everyone understand exactly what they're signing. I'm more than happy to answer additional questions when we are face to face together. But I wanted to share the full document so that you would have time to look it over and understand what it is that it says. I look forward to seeing you.